Some encounters were never meant to be evidence, yet they captured something difficult to explain. The footage has been analyzed for years, but no explanation has fully settled the debate. Witnesses stand by what they recorded. In this episode, we will examine the most convincing real Bigfoot encounters ever filmed. It was October 21, 2016, when Cara DeLange hiked alone into a remote section of Plumas National Forest. Just after midnight, she reached the trailhead northwest of Quincy, drawn back by weeks of strange vocalizations recorded near a dry creek bed, deep sounds that didn't match any known animal and seemed to answer when she approached. Tonight, she brought a camera. The 40-minute hike through dense fog kept her tense. The temperature hovered in the low 40s. By 1 a.m., she crouched near Manzanita for stability, her recorder clipped on, her audio station blinking nearby. Then the forest fell unnaturally quiet. She felt watched before she heard anything at all. A faint sound came from upslope, not a footfall, but the soft compression of forest debris under significant weight. Then nothing. She waited. Her hand tightened slightly on the camera, but she did not move. Minutes passed. The air felt heavier. She caught a scent on the wind, faint and organic. Musky? Not the sharp smell of a bear or the distinctive odor of a mountain lion. Something else. Something she could not identify. Another sound. Closer now. The snap of a small twig, followed by absolute stillness. Whatever was out there had stopped moving. It was evaluating her, testing whether she was a threat. She kept her posture relaxed, non-threatening, and waited for it to decide. The motion sensor on her audio station remained green. Whatever was watching her was staying just outside the detection radius. Deliberate, controlled. At 1:14 a.m., she heard the first sound. It came from downslope, maybe 50 feet away, hidden in the fog. A low, guttural hum that lasted 4 seconds and then stopped. The sound was deep enough that she felt it in her chest, a vibration that seemed to resonate through her ribcage. It did not sound like a bear. It did not sound like anything she had encountered before. The tone was controlled, sustained, and deliberate. Cara stood motionless, her pulse quickening. She adjusted the camera angle toward the source of the sound and waited for it to come again. Her breathing slowed. She focused on listening, filtering out the wind and the distant rustle of branches. 40 seconds passed. Then the sound repeated, this time closer. It was the same low rumble, but shorter, with a rising inflection at the end. It sounded like a question, like the source was testing whether she was still there, like it was trying to provoke a response. She did not respond. She kept her breathing shallow and her movements minimal. The motion sensor on her audio station switched from red to green. Something had entered the detection radius, something large enough to trigger the infrared beam. At 1:17 a.m., she saw movement. A shape emerged from the fog near the creek bed, roughly 40 feet away. It was tall, far taller than any human, and broad through the shoulders. The figure moved slowly, taking deliberate steps through the underbrush. It was upright, walking on 2 legs, and covered in dark fur or hair that blended with the shadows. The head was massive, the arms hung past the hips, and the posture was stable and controlled. The gait was smooth, not the lumbering shuffle of a bear. What happened next would change everything Cara thought she knew about intelligence in the wild. The creature was not simply searching for food. It was not marking territory. What it was about to do had never been documented in any Sasquatch encounter on record. Cara's hands tightened around the camera. She kept the lens steady, filming the figure as it moved closer to the audio station. The creature stopped approximately 20 feet from the tripod and stood completely still. It was facing the equipment, as if examining it, as if trying to understand what it was. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. The creature did not move. Cara did not move. The only sound was the wind through the trees and the faint hum of the recorder running on her jacket. Then the creature made a sound. It was not the deep rumble from before. This sound was different. It started low, then shifted into a mid-range tone and ended with a sharp exhalation. The rhythm was deliberate, broken into 3 distinct pulses. It sounded almost like speech, like the creature was trying to form words, like it was attempting to mimic the cadence of human language. Kara's breath caught. She had heard vocalizations on her recordings before, but this was different. This was intentional, structured. The creature was attempting to communicate. She stayed silent, unsure of what to do. The creature turned slightly, shifting its weight, and the motion sensor blinked twice before returning to solid green. The figure was still within detection range, but it had moved. It was no longer facing the equipment, it was facing her direction. Kara froze. She could see the outline clearly now. The creature was looking directly at her. It had seen her immediately. At 1:21 a.m., the creature took 2 steps forward. The movement was smooth and controlled, closing the distance to roughly 30 feet. Kara's heart pounded. She considered retreating, but movement might provoke a response. She remained crouched, keeping the camera raised, and filmed. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The creature stopped again. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Then it made another sound. This one was quieter, more controlled, and contained a clear vowel sound in the middle. The sound was drawn out and resonant, followed by a soft consonant at the end. It resembled the structure of human speech, but rendered in a voice too deep and too powerful to belong to any person. Kara realized the creature was experimenting with its voice, testing sounds, exploring what it could produce. She made a decision. She cleared her throat softly, just loud enough to be heard. The creature reacted immediately. Its head snapped toward her, and its body shifted into a slightly crouched posture. For 3 seconds, it remained motionless. Then it repeated the sound it had just made, but louder this time. The vowel sound echoed through the trees, hanging in the cold air. Kara's pulse spiked. She decided to respond. She spoke a single word of greeting, keeping her voice low and calm. The word hung in the air. The creature tilted its head again, processing the sound. Then, after a pause of nearly 10 seconds, it made a sound in response. The sound that came out was deep, guttural, and formless. There was a faint echo of her vocal tone, but nothing resembled actual syllables. It was attempting something, but the result was crude and unrefined. Kara's hands started shaking. She spoke the word again, slower this time, enunciating carefully. The creature responded with another sound. It was no clearer than the first. The vocalization was rough, breathy, with no discernible pattern. Whatever the creature was doing, it was not producing anything close to human speech. Kara felt a mix of fear and awe. She raised the camera higher, ensuring the lens captured the figure in the frame. The recording light blinked steadily, documenting everything. At 1:23 a.m., the creature took several more steps forward, now standing approximately 25 feet away. Kara could see more detail now. The body was covered in dark brown or black hair, matted and uneven. The shoulders were impossibly wide, easily 3 feet across, and the chest was deep and barrel-shaped. The arms were long and muscular, extending well past the hips, and the hands were large, with thick fingers that hung loosely at its sides. The face was partially obscured by shadow, but she could see the shape of a heavy brow ridge and a pronounced jaw. The head was conical, rising to a peak at the crown. The creature shifted its weight, and Kara observed how it moved. The feet were broad and flat, designed for stability on uneven terrain. Each step was planted carefully, heel first, then rolling forward to the toes. The movement was fluid and controlled, nothing like the stiff gait of a person in a costume. The knees bent naturally, absorbing the creature's mass with each shift. Its arms hung loosely at its sides, the hands occasionally flexing open and closed. The fingers were thick and powerful, capable of gripping branches or tearing bark. As she watched, the creature reached out and touched the trunk of a nearby pine tree. The motion was exploratory, not aggressive. It ran its palm down the bark, testing the texture, then brought its hand to its face briefly. Scent checking. The behavior mirrored what she had seen in gorillas investigating new territory. The creature's shoulders rolled as it adjusted its posture. The musculature was dense and powerful, designed for climbing and pulling. The chest expanded with each breath, the ribcage visible beneath the hair. The head turned slowly from side to side, scanning the area with methodical precision. The ears, small and close to the skull, twitched occasionally, tracking sounds Kara could not hear. It crouched slightly and placed one hand on the ground, balancing its weight between 3 points of contact. The posture was cautious, non-threatening, but ready. Kara noticed something else: a smell. It was faint at first, carried on the cold air between them, but it grew stronger as the creature moved. The odor was musky and organic, like wet animal fur mixed with earth and something else she could not identify. It was not unpleasant, but it was distinctly wild. The scent confirmed what her eyes were telling her. This was not a person in a costume. This was a living creature with its own biology, its own presence. The creature's breathing was audible now. Deep, measured breaths that created small clouds of condensation in the cold air. Each exhale produced a soft rushing sound, like wind through a cave opening. The respiratory capacity was enormous. Whatever this creature was, its lungs were far larger than any human's. The creature made another sound. This one was different. It was not a mimicry attempt. It was a vocalization from its own repertoire, a low, rhythmic hum that rose and fell in pitch. The sound lasted nearly 8 seconds and contained multiple tonal shifts. The pattern was structured, but whether it carried specific meaning or was simply a complex call remained unknowable. Kara did not understand the sounds, but she recognized the pattern. The creature remained still and vocalized after she spoke, matching her timing rather than her words. It was not threatening her. It was not charging or displaying aggression. She decided to keep talking. She spoke slowly, enunciating each word, and introduced herself by name. The creature listened. Its head tilted again, and its body remained still. The massive chest rose and fell with each breath. After a pause of nearly 15 seconds, it attempted to respond. The sound that emerged was a low rumble, followed by a sharper vocalization. The sounds were rough and lacked any clear structure. Whatever the creature was doing, it bore no resemblance to speech. She repeated her name alone, speaking it clearly and deliberately. The creature responded with a sound that was low and guttural. There was no clear pattern, no recognizable attempt at replication. It was simply vocalizing in response to her voice. Kara felt tears welling in her eyes, though she did not know if it was from fear or wonder. She was standing face to face with something that was not human, something that was reacting to her movements and voice. At 1:31 a.m., the creature crouched slightly and placed one hand on the ground. The motion was deliberate, non-threatening. It was lowering itself to appear less imposing. Kara noticed the hand was enormous, easily twice the size of her own, with long fingers and thick nails that resembled claws, but appeared blunt. The palm was broad and covered in the same dark hair that covered the rest of the body. The creature made another sound, this time softer. It was a single syllable, drawn out and gentle. The tone was calm, almost soothing. Kara responded in kind, keeping her voice low and steady. She spoke reassuring words, though she suspected the creature understood tone more than language. She told it she meant no harm, that she was simply observing, that she was not a threat. The creature did not repeat her words this time. Instead, it made a series of sounds, separated by pauses. The vocalizations varied in pitch and duration, suggesting some kind of internal structure, but Kara could not identify any patterns that resembled human language. Kara decided to try something. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a granola bar. She unwrapped it slowly, the crinkling of the wrapper loud in the silence. The creature's head shifted immediately, tracking the sound with precision. Kara broke off a piece of the bar and held it out in her open palm, extending her arm slowly and deliberately. She kept her movements non-threatening, her posture relaxed. The creature stared at her hand. It did not move toward her, but it did not retreat either. Its eyes, barely visible in the darkness, remained fixed on the offering. After a long pause of nearly 20 seconds, it made a soft sound, almost like a hum of acknowledgement. Then it stood upright again, rising to its full height of over 7 feet. The motion was fluid, effortless, demonstrating immense strength and balance. Kara lowered her hand, realizing the creature was not interested in the food. It was interested in the interaction itself. At 1:38 a.m., the creature spoke again. This time, the sound was more complex. It started with a low hum, transitioned into a mid-range tone, and ended with what might have been a stopped consonant. The structure suggested deliberate vocal control, but the meaning was impossible to decipher. Kara listened carefully. She responded, keeping her tone gentle. She told the creature she did not understand, but that she was listening. The creature tilted its head, processing her words. Then it repeated the sound. The consistency suggested the vocalization had meaning within the creature's own communication system, but what that meaning was remained unknowable. The creature then did something unexpected. It placed its hand on its own chest, over the area where a human heart would be. The gesture was deliberate. It held the position for 3 seconds while making a low, rumbling sound. The behavior resembled a posture shift or calming gesture, similar to what great apes do when displaying non-aggression. Kara felt a chill run through her. She was witnessing something that defied easy explanation. A creature attempting to interact with her through vocalizations and physical gestures. At 1:43 a.m., the creature made a new sound. This one was sharper, more urgent. It was a single syllable, repeated 3 times in quick succession. The rhythm was staccato, insistent. The tone had shifted from curiosity to urgency. The creature was making an urgent call, trying to focus her awareness on something specific. She responded, telling the creature she was listening, that she was paying attention. The creature took a step back, creating more distance. Its body turned partially toward the forest upslope. One arm moved outward slightly, not a clear point, but a directional motion. The head turned in the same direction. The message was readable, but subtle. Something in that direction had its attention. What the creature had sensed was already approaching. Within minutes, Kara would understand why the creature was trying to warn her, and she would realize that the alarm call it was about to make would be the difference between making it out of the forest alive or becoming another disappearance statistic in Plumas County. Kara followed the line of the creature's gesture, trying to see what it was indicating. She could make out the dark shapes of trees and underbrush. She did not understand what the creature was trying to communicate. Was there something in that direction? Was it warning her? Was it trying to show her something? She looked back at the creature and shook her head slowly, trying to convey her confusion. The creature lowered its arm. It made another sound, this one forceful and sustained. The vocalization was a single sharp exhalation, followed by a drawn-out low tone. It did not sound like any English word, but the urgency was unmistakable. Kara's stomach tightened. Whatever the sound meant in the creature's communication system, the tone conveyed alarm. She asked the creature to clarify, her voice shaking slightly. The creature repeated the sound, louder and more insistent this time. The urgency had intensified. Kara felt a wave of fear wash over her. The creature was not being aggressive, but the urgency in its tone was clear. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The creature had detected something she could not yet perceive. She took a slow step backward, keeping her eyes on the creature. It did not follow. It simply stood there, watching her, its massive frame tense and alert, focused on something beyond her position. At 1:47 a.m., Kara heard another sound. This one did not come from the creature in front of her. It came from deeper in the forest, upslope, in the direction the creature had indicated. It was another vocalization, similar in register, but different in tone, lower, more resonant. The sound carried differently through the trees. The creature in front of her reacted immediately. Its entire posture changed. The shoulders squared, the head lowered slightly. It turned fully toward the new sound and made a sharp vocalization in response. The sound was loud, forceful, and carried territorial assertion. The response from upslope was another deep vocalization. The first creature responded immediately with a louder, more forceful call. The sound resonated through the trees, a deep boom that Kara felt in her chest. It was a territorial assertion, clear and unmistakable. The creature squared its shoulders and turned fully toward the source of the approaching presence. From upslope came another call, lower in pitch and longer in duration. The second creature was answering the challenge. The first creature responded with 3 sharp exhalations in rapid succession, each one louder than the last. The pattern was aggressive, escalating. Then came a sound Kara had only heard in documentaries about gorillas. The first creature grabbed a dead branch from a nearby shrub and snapped it cleanly in half. The crack echoed through the forest. It dropped the broken pieces and made another vocalization, this one sharper and more insistent. The display was unmistakable, a show of strength, a warning. The second creature responded with its own call, but this time the tone had shifted. It was lower, less aggressive. The first creature held its ground, chest expanded, head slightly lowered. It made one more call, sustained and forceful, then waited. Silence. 10 seconds passed. 20. The first creature remained motionless, body oriented upslope, maintaining its defensive posture. Then, faintly, Kara heard movement in the distance. Not approaching, retreating. The second creature was backing down. The first creature did not relax immediately. It remained tense, listening, ensuring the threat had passed. Only after a full minute of silence did its posture begin to shift. The territorial challenge was over. The boundary had been established. The creature made one final vocalization toward the forest, then turned its head back toward Kara. It repeated the urgent sound it had made earlier. The creature took one step in her direction, not threateningly, but insistently. Its body angled slightly toward the trail. The message was clear even without words. She needed to leave. Kara understood. There was another one, and whatever was approaching had triggered a territorial response from the first creature. The creature in front of her was asserting dominance over this section of forest. Kara just happened to be within the boundaries it was defending. She nodded quickly and took another step back, acknowledging the situation. The creature did not respond with vocalizations this time. It simply held its position, body-oriented, toward the source of the approaching threat. Its posture was defensive, territorial. Whatever was coming was violating claimed space, and the first creature was making its stance clear. Kara turned and moved quickly but carefully through the underbrush, heading back toward the trail. She kept the camera running, though she was no longer filming anything useful. Her focus was on getting out. She heard another exchange of vocalizations in the distance. The two creatures were still calling back and forth, establishing territorial boundaries through sound. She did not look back. She moved as quickly as the terrain allowed, her headlamp cutting through the darkness. The forest felt different now. The atmosphere had shifted. As she moved, she became aware of movement somewhere in the forest to her left. Not close, but present. She could hear occasional sounds through the undergrowth, but nothing that suggested active pursuit. Whatever was out there was moving through its own territory, not chasing her specifically. Kara maintained her pace. Her heart hammered. The sounds to her left faded after another minute. The forest went quiet again. By 1:52 a.m., she reached the trail. She broke into a jog, her breath coming in short bursts. She did not stop until she was back at the trailhead, standing next to her vehicle with the doors locked. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the keys. She sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, her hands still shaking, her heart still racing, before she finally started the engine. She drove back to Quincy in silence, replaying the encounter in her mind. The creature had made vocalizations in response to her voice, and when a territorial dispute began, she had been caught in the middle. The first creature's behavior had bought her time to leave, whether intentionally or simply as a side effect of defending its claimed area. The following morning, Kara reviewed the footage on her camera. The video was low resolution and obscured, but the audio was clear. She could hear her own voice, followed by the creature's vocalizations. The sounds were deep, guttural, and bore no resemblance to human speech. She could hear the rhythmic calls. She could hear the final urgent sound before she fled. She played the segments repeatedly. The creature had not produced recognizable words. The vocalization showed some variation, but remained rough and formless. There was no clear pattern of improvement or imitation. What struck her most was the reactivity. The creature did not vocalize randomly. When she made sounds, it responded with its own calls. The exchange had a back-and-forth quality, though the content remained unintelligible. The chest gesture replayed in her mind. The creature had made a deliberate physical motion while vocalizing. The behavior suggested a non-threatening display, though its exact purpose was unclear. Kara saved the file and made multiple backups across different devices and cloud storage. She considered submitting the evidence to the Forest Service or to academic institutions, but she hesitated. The encounter had been too personal, too profound, to hand over to an agency that might dismiss or bury it. The creature had engaged with her in a way she never thought possible. Instead, she kept the footage private. She shared it with only a handful of trusted colleagues under strict confidentiality agreements. The responses were mixed. Some believed the audio was authentic and represented groundbreaking evidence of non-human speech capability. Others questioned the source, suggesting the sounds could have been produced by a human hoaxer or misidentified wildlife. The debate would likely continue for years, but Kara knew what she had experienced. She had been there. She had seen the creature standing less than 25 feet away. She had heard it vocalize in response to her voice. She had heard the urgent calls when territorial conflict began. The creature had not tried to harm her. It had engaged in what appeared to be responsive behavior, though the exact nature of the interaction remained ambiguous. And when another presence arrived, the territorial response had given her the opportunity to leave. Kara returned to the site twice in the following weeks, but she never encountered the creature again. The motion-triggered audio stations continued recording for another month, but the vocalizations stopped. The forest fell silent. Whatever had been there was gone, or had chosen to remain hidden. She completed her graduate program in 2019 and moved to Oregon, where she now works as a conservation biologist. She rarely discusses the encounter, but in private, she has never wavered about what happened that night. The creature was real. The sounds were real. For a few minutes in a fog-covered forest, a human and an unknown primate exchanged sounds that neither fully understood. The footage remains in her possession. No agency has confirmed it, and no similar recordings have surfaced. What stays with her is the memory of a creature responding to her voice, and the realization that its warning gave her the chance to escape.
Nope.
It was late March when I first reviewed the trail camera footage that would change everything. In the frame, my pasture fence line appeared normal for exactly 4 seconds. Then, at the far right edge of the screen, a massive silhouette stepped partially into view before immediately retreating back into darkness. The figure stood upright. Its shoulder width exceeded anything I had seen in decades of living on this property. I replayed the footage 17 times that morning, trying to extract any additional detail from the grainy night vision recording. Each viewing confirmed the same disturbing facts. The figure moved with deliberate caution, its posture suggesting awareness of the camera's position. The way it pulled back indicated intelligence, not the random movement of wildlife wandering through the frame. Something knew the camera was there and had chosen to remain just outside its full field of view. The next morning, I found a section of fence along the eastern perimeter bent outward. The metal posts, designed to withstand livestock pressure, had been pushed from the inside as though something with tremendous force had tested the boundary. I measured the deformation carefully. The fence had been displaced approximately 14 inches from its original position. No wires were snapped. No posts were uprooted. Just a deliberate, controlled bend that suggested strength far beyond what any local animal possessed. Black bears in the region typically weighed between 200 and 400 pounds and left claw marks when interacting with structures. This fence showed no scratches, no tears in the wire mesh, no indication of an animal trying to get through a barrier. Instead, it looked like something had simply placed its weight against the fence and pushed, testing the strength of the boundary without any intention of crossing it. But what happened 4 nights later made the fence incident seem like nothing more than a gentle warning. 4 nights after the fence incident, my cattle began acting strangely. Around 9:30 p.m., all 16 heads clustered tightly into the back corner of the pasture, facing outward in a defensive formation I had only seen when coyotes prowled nearby. But there were no coyotes that night, just an unnatural stillness that settled over the property like a held breath. The temperature had dropped to around 54 degrees, typical for early April evenings in this region. The moon was 3 days past full, providing enough ambient light to see shapes and movement across the open pasture. Yet despite the visibility, I could identify nothing that would explain my cattle's behavior. They stood pressed together, their breath forming small clouds in the cool air, their attention fixed on the tree line to the east. Standing on my porch, I listened. The usual chorus of crickets and distant owl calls had gone silent. In 23 years of living on this property, I had learned to read the night sounds. Silence meant a predator, but predators didn't silence an entire forest. Coyotes, bobcats, even the occasional mountain lion reported in the area, none of them created this kind of absolute quiet. The stillness felt wrong, as though every creature within a half-mile radius had simultaneously decided to stop making noise. Then, from somewhere deep in the tree line, roughly 80 yards away, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, spaced about 3 seconds apart. Each step produced a heavy crunch in the underbrush that suggested significant weight. The steps moved parallel to the fence line for nearly 2 minutes before stopping completely. The rhythm never varied. The pattern felt purposeful, like something walking a patrol route rather than an animal wandering in search of food. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through darkness, but revealed nothing except swaying branches and empty space between trees. Whatever had been there was either gone or standing perfectly still beyond the light's reach. I swept the beam back and forth along the tree line for nearly 5 minutes, searching for any reflection of eyes, any movement, any confirmation of what my ears had detected. The light showed only trees and shadows. Morning brought the first physical evidence. In a patch of mud near the cattle's water trough, I found a print. The impression measured roughly 17 inches long and nearly 8 inches across at the widest point. 5 distinct toe marks pressed deep into the soil, each toe showing individual definition that ruled out any kind of boot or artificial print. The depth of the impression suggested a weight far exceeding that of any black bear native to the region. I had seen bear prints before. They showed claw marks extending beyond the toe pads. This print showed no claws. The stride length between prints measured close to 5 feet, indicating something that moved on 2 legs with a gait that no 4-legged animal could replicate. I photographed the print from multiple angles, placing a dollar bill next to it for scale reference. The bill measured 6 inches long. The print dwarfed it. I made a plaster cast, mixing the powder carefully and pouring it into the impression with the precision of someone who understood I might need proof of what I was seeing. While the plaster dried, I walked the fence line looking for additional prints or disturbances. I found 3 more impressions in softer soil near the eastern corner post, all showing the same massive size and bipedal stride pattern. Whatever had walked my property the previous night had weight enough to sink nearly 2 inches into packed earth. I thought finding physical proof would give me some sense of control over the situation. I was wrong. What came next proved that whatever was out there wasn't just passing through, it was studying me. The following week brought a new pattern. On 3 consecutive nights, I woke to the sound of footsteps circling my barn. Not random wandering, but a deliberate, measured pace that suggested purposeful movement. The steps always followed the same route, starting at the northwest corner, moving clockwise around the entire structure, then stopping at the exact point where they began. The rhythm never varied. Heavy step, pause, heavy step, pause. The pattern was so consistent it felt rehearsed, as though whatever was out there had walked that same path many times before. On the second night, I timed the intervals with my watch. Each circuit took roughly 4 minutes, disturbingly consistent for something that was supposed to be wildlife. The consistency was unsettling. Animals don't move with that kind of precision. I tried to catch a glimpse from my bedroom window, which offered a partial view of the barn's southern side. But each time I looked out, the footsteps would pause immediately, as though the creature could sense when it was being observed. The moment I stepped back from the window, the walking would resume. After the third attempt, I gave up and simply listened, mapping the creature's route in my mind by tracking the sound of each footfall against the barn's exterior. The footsteps were heavy enough that I could feel faint vibrations through my house's foundation when the creature passed the closest point to my bedroom. Based on the sound and the slight tremor, the creature was extremely heavy, though I had no way to confirm any specific weight. The only certainty was that nothing in the region's natural wildlife catalog matched what I was hearing. On the 4th morning, I found something that elevated my concern from confusion to genuine unease. A metal feed bin lid, which weighed close to 40 pounds, had been lifted off its container and placed upright against the barn wall. Not knocked over, not dragged. Carefully positioned in a standing position that required both strength and deliberate intention. I examined the bin carefully. The lid showed no dents, no scratch marks, no indication it had been pried or forced. It had simply been removed and relocated with care that suggested opposable grip, strength, and problem-solving intelligence. The bin had been stored in the barn, with the lid secured by its own weight and a simple friction fit. Removing it required understanding how the lid worked, not just brute force. Over the next 5 nights, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each morning, I found 3 gates unlatched in the exact same sequence. First, the gate to the chicken coop, then the gate to the equipment shed, then the gate to the back pasture. Never in a different order, never just 1 or 2. Always all 3, always in that specific progression. The latches showed no damage, no scratch marks from claws, no pry marks from tools. They had been lifted cleanly, the way a person would open them, but at times when no person should have been on my property. Whatever was visiting my farm was returning to the same locations night after night, interacting with my property in ways that demonstrated both memory and intention. But then it did something that made all those previous incidents feel like practice runs for what was really coming. On April 19th, while walking the fence line just before sunset, I experienced something that crossed the line from strange to genuinely frightening. As I walked along the tree line bordering my property, every single one of my footsteps was answered by another footstep from within the woods. The mimic matched my rhythm perfectly. When I took 2 quick steps, 2 heavy steps responded. When I stopped, the echo stopped instantly. The evening light was fading quickly, the sun already below the horizon, leaving only the pale glow of twilight filtering through the trees. Visibility extended about 40 yards into the forest before the shadows became too thick to penetrate. Whatever was matching my movements remained just beyond that visible range, hidden in the darkening woods, but close enough that I could hear each footfall with perfect clarity. I tested it deliberately. 1 step. The forest answered with 1 step, the sound coming from approximately 30 yards into the trees. 3 steps in quick succession. 3 heavy impacts responded immediately, matching my rhythm with precision that seemed impossible for random coincidence. I stopped and counted to 10. Silence. I took 2 slow steps. 2 slow, heavy steps answered from the same location. I changed my pace, walking in an irregular pattern. 2 quick steps, pause, 1 slow step, pause, 3 quick steps. The mimic matched every variation perfectly, maintaining the same approximate distance while demonstrating an ability to adapt its movement to my changing rhythm. The moment I turned and walked quickly back toward the house, the mimic footsteps stopped completely. Silence returned to the woods. Whatever was out there could move through the tree line without revealing itself, close enough for every step to match mine. The precision didn't feel like wandering, it felt like something paying close attention to me. I invested in additional trail cameras, hoping to finally capture clear footage of whatever was stalking my property. Instead, the cameras seemed to fail at the exact moments something should have triggered them. Footage showed clear recordings of deer, possums, and my own movements during daylight hours. But at night, during the times I heard activity around the barn or near the house, the cameras produced corrupted files at the exact moments the infrared triggers should have activated, leaving blank segments instead of footage. One camera, positioned near the eastern fence line, captured a single frame that made it through uncorrupted. The image showed a blurred shoulder and part of a massive arm reaching past the camera's field of view. The arm appeared covered in dark hair and measured thicker than any human limb. The frame before and after showed nothing but static. Around this same period, my cattle began refusing to graze anywhere near the eastern fence. They would walk to within 20 feet of that boundary and then turn away, choosing to crowd into the western section of the pasture even when fresh grass grew untouched on the eastern side. They were avoiding an area where they sensed danger. I tried to tell myself the worst was over, that maybe the creature was moving on. Then one night it answered me back, and I realized the terror was only beginning. On the night of May 2nd, while standing on my back porch, I heard 2 distinct knocking sounds from deep within the woods. The sounds were sharp and resonant, like wood striking wood with significant force. The knocks came from a location I estimated to be roughly 200 yards into the forest. I had read about tree knocking, about how some researchers believed large primates used the sound to communicate over distance. I had always dismissed such claims as folklore and misidentification, but standing there in the dark, hearing those deliberate impacts echo through the trees, I made a decision that surprised myself. I picked up a thick branch from the woodpile and struck it hard against a fence post. 1 solid knock. Then I waited. The response came within 5 seconds. 3 knocks, rapid succession, from a completely different direction than the original sounds. The new knocks came from somewhere northwest of my position, perhaps 150 yards away. Whatever had answered me had either moved with impossible speed, or there were 2 of them communicating across the darkness. I did not knock again. Some experiments should not be repeated. The morning of May 7th brought one of the most unnerving discoveries of the entire ordeal. I walked out to the pasture to find all 16 cattle arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward, as though they had been deliberately herded into that formation during the night. The circle measured approximately 20 feet in diameter. Each animal stood calm and uninjured, but the positioning was precise in a way that natural animal behavior does not produce. The fencing showed no breaks. No gates had been opened. Whatever had arranged my livestock into that circle had done so without causing panic, injury, or any attempt to harm them. The display seemed designed not to predate, but to demonstrate capability, to show that it could control my animals any time it chose to. What happened 3 days later proved it could get even closer than I ever imagined. May 10th marked the first time I saw the creature at close range. I was checking the water trough near the barn around 8:30 p.m., just after sunset. The shadows were thick, but not yet completely dark. As I bent down to inspect the valve, I felt the sudden, instinctive sensation of being watched. I straightened slowly and turned my head toward the equipment area. There, standing directly behind my tractor roughly 25 feet away, was a massive upright figure. Even in the dim light, the size was unmistakable. The silhouette stood at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders that extended far beyond human proportions. The head appeared slightly conical, sitting atop a thick neck with almost no visible separation. For 3 seconds, neither the creature nor I moved. Then, without any sound of effort or hurry, it took one enormous step backward and disappeared into the darkness beyond the barn. No running, no crashing through brush. Just a single controlled movement that carried it out of sight with unnatural silence. I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. I had finally seen it clearly enough to know that whatever was stalking my farm was not a bear, not a person, and not anything I could report to authorities without being dismissed outright. But seeing it from 25 feet away was nothing compared to what it did next, when it marked my home as its territory. The scratches appeared on 3 trees surrounding my house at roughly equal distances. The marks ran from about 7 feet off the ground down to roughly 5 feet, carved in parallel lines that looked like they had been made by something dragging downward with significant pressure. The edges of the scratches were smooth, not jagged, like claw marks would be. They appeared almost burnished, as though made by something scraping with controlled force rather than tearing. The 3 trees formed a rough triangle with my house at the center, suggesting the marks were intentional boundary indicators rather than random damage. Whatever had made them wanted me to know my house was now inside a defined perimeter. The question that kept me awake that night was simple and terrifying. Was I inside a territory or inside a trap? I got my answer 3 nights later when it climbed onto my porch for the first time. At 3:17 a.m. on May 15th, I woke to the sound of my porch boards creaking under extreme weight. My front porch was built from oak planks over solid joists, designed to support furniture and foot traffic without noise. Yet each step produced a deep groan that indicated something far heavier than any person was moving across the wood. The footsteps moved slowly from left to right, pausing every few seconds as though the creature was testing each board before committing its full weight. I could hear breathing through the front door, the same slow, controlled respiration I'd come to recognize. I remained completely still in my bed, barely breathing myself, knowing that the door was unlocked, knowing that only a single wooden barrier separated me from something that could tear that door off its hinges if it chose to. After nearly 2 minutes, the footsteps moved back across the porch and descended the stairs. I heard them fade into the distance, moving toward the barn. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. The porch was terrifying enough. But 2 nights later, it showed me just how much force it could bring to bear if it wanted to. At approximately 1:30 a.m., a violent slam shook the barn so hard that I felt the vibration in my house 40 yards away. My cattle inside erupted into panic, crashing against their stalls and bellowing in terror. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside, certain I would find a vehicle had crashed into the structure or a tree had fallen against the wall. Instead, I found a deep dent in the barn's exterior metal siding, shaped like a shoulder or torso impression. The dent measured roughly 3 feet wide and extended about 18 inches in height. The metal had buckled inward from a single massive impact. No fallen branches, and nothing that could explain the force required to damage reinforced barn siding that severely. Whatever had hit the wall had done so with enough power to terrify my livestock and leave structural damage that would cost hundreds of dollars to repair. The dent felt like a warning rather than random impact. On May 21st, one of my trail cameras finally captured something that made it through without corruption. The footage showed a single frame of an eye reflecting the camera's infrared light. The eye appeared at a height of approximately 7 feet off the ground, far above where any human eye would be positioned. The reflection showed a reddish-orange color, typical of eyeshine, but the size and placement were wrong for any known animal in the region. The eye blinked once, a slow, deliberate closure and reopening before the feed cut to complete black. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m. The camera had been positioned facing a trail that led from the woods toward the barn, meaning whatever had triggered it had been approaching the property when the image was captured. I reviewed the frame dozens of times, zooming in on every detail. The eye showed awareness, not the blank stare of a startled animal. It appeared to be looking directly at the camera, as though the creature knew exactly where the device was positioned and had chosen to stare into it before cutting the feed. Then it began circling my house at night, and I realized it was no longer content to just watch from a distance. On May 24th, I discovered footprints that circled my entire house for the first time. The tracks formed a complete loop around the foundation, pressed into soft soil and patches of remaining mud from recent rain. The prints were deeper than previous impressions, indicating the creature had been standing in each location for extended periods, rather than simply walking past. At certain points, the tracks showed where the figure had stood facing the house, positioned directly in line with windows or doors. The spacing between prints grew shorter near the back porch, suggesting slower, more careful movement in that area. The creature was no longer maintaining distance. It was studying the house in detail, testing approaches, and spending more time at closer range during each visit. The pattern showed escalation toward some kind of conclusion that I could sense building like pressure before a storm. Over the next 3 nights, the visits came earlier and lasted longer. Where the creature had previously arrived well after midnight, now it approached the property as early as 9 p.m. The breathing at the windows occurred multiple times each night. The footsteps circled the house repeatedly, rather than just once. I began sleeping with my phone charged and ready, my flashlight within reach, and my bedroom door locked, despite knowing that a lock would provide no real protection against something that could dent metal barn siding with a single impact. On the afternoon of May 27th, while repairing fence line, I heard movement in the woods and caught a glimpse of a massive shape keeping pace with me as I worked, staying just inside the tree line about 50 yards away. It was watching me during daylight now, not just at night. That evening, after sunset, I heard it settle somewhere just outside the barn. The sound was like something large lowering itself to the ground, followed by silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of something waiting. Then the storm came, and in the lightning flashes, I finally saw exactly what had been stalking me for 2 months. The power went out at 10:37 p.m. My entire property dropped into complete darkness, except for the occasional flash of lightning from a storm system moving through the area. The outage wasn't unusual for a spring storm, but the timing made it feel intentional, even though there was no proof of anything beyond weather. In those brief bursts of light, I saw it. Standing in my front yard, roughly 30 feet from the porch, was the full silhouette of the creature. The lightning revealed massive head structure that appeared slightly conical, with a pronounced brow ridge that cast deep shadows across where the face would be. The shoulders seemed impossibly broad, extending far beyond human proportions, giving the figure a wedge-shaped upper body that tapered to a narrower waist. The arms hung past where its knees would be, the hands appearing massive even in silhouette. The creature stood completely still, facing the house directly. In that frozen moment of illumination, I could see it was not leaning or crouching. It stood fully upright with perfect posture, its height exceeding 8 feet by what appeared to be several inches. The proportions were wrong for any known animal. The stillness was wrong for any living thing caught in a lightning flash. Most creatures startled by sudden light would flinch or react. This one simply stood, as though it had been waiting in that exact position for me to see it. Another flash of lightning 3 seconds later. It had moved 10 feet closer. No sound of footsteps. No visible motion between the darkness and the light. Just a position shift that occurred between moments of illumination, as though the creature could cross distance during the blackness without disturbing the ground or making any audible approach. I retreated to my bedroom and activated my phone's audio recorder, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the device. Through the walls, I heard heavy, slow footsteps approaching the house. Each step produced a deep impact that I felt through the floor, the vibrations traveling up through the foundation and into my bones. The steps were methodical, measured, carrying weight that compressed the earth with each footfall. Then came breathing at my bedroom window, so close I could hear the slight whistle of air moving through whatever served as the creature's nostrils. The recording captured it clearly, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that continued for nearly 30 seconds. Each breath moved significant volume of air, the sound deeper and more resonant than human breathing, suggesting lung capacity, far exceeding normal mammalian proportions for even large animals. I remained frozen in my bed, the phone clutched in my trembling hand, recording equipment that felt absurdly inadequate for documenting what was happening outside my window. The breathing continued with mechanical regularity. Inhale for 3 seconds. Exhale for 4. Inhale for 3. Exhale for 4. The creature was not exerting itself. It was not agitated. It was simply standing at my window, breathing calmly while I cowered inside. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A low vocalization, not quite a growl, but deeper than any human voice could produce, that resonated through the walls like a subsonic vibration. The sound lasted approximately 4 seconds before fading into a final, long exhale. The vocalization felt intentional, directed, as though the creature was announcing its presence in a way that required acknowledgement. The recording captured everything: the breathing, the vocalization, the exhale, and then the sound of footsteps moving away from the house. I listened until I could no longer hear anything except my own breathing and the sound of rain beginning to fall. When the sun came up, I made a decision. I walked into those woods following the trail where I'd seen the creature disappear. I don't know what I hoped to find. Answers, maybe. Proof that would make someone believe me. Or maybe I just needed to face whatever was out there on my own terms instead of waiting for it to come back to my window one more time. I followed tracks that led deeper into the forest, past the creek bed where the ground turned soft and muddy. The prints were fresh, enormous, pressed deep into the earth. I kept walking, following them further than I should have, until I reached a clearing I'd never seen before, despite living on this land for over 2 decades. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, the same rhythm I'd come to know over the past 2 months. I turned around, and there it stood at the edge of the clearing, fully visible in the morning light for the first time. It was bigger than I'd even imagined. The face showed intelligence in the eyes, something that looked almost human, but fundamentally wasn't. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then it took a step toward me. I don't remember what happened after that.
Wait up.
On March 17, 2025, Brian thought he filmed a bear, but instead captured the most terrifying creature on planet Earth. The disgustingly large Sasquatch didn't hesitate and went after him, and what investigators later discovered about his sighting turned this story into the darkest Bigfoot encounter ever seen. When Brian Phillips parked at the Farley's Prairie Trailhead in Ocala National Forest around 2 p.m., planning a simple 4-mile loop through the pine flatwoods. The temperature sat at 73 degrees, and the forest was unusually quiet. He had covered roughly 1.5 miles when he noticed something moving through the palmetto scrub approximately 200 feet ahead. His first assumption was a black bear, common in this part of the forest. Black bears were frequently sighted in Ocala National Forest, especially during spring when they emerged from their winter dens. He stopped walking and reached for his phone, more out of excitement than concern. The figure moved between 2 longleaf pines, and Brian activated his camera. Through the screen, he watched as the shape emerged into a small clearing. It was walking upright. The stride was too long, the proportions completely wrong for a human. The shoulders were massive, easily 3 feet across. Brian estimated the height at around 7.5 feet, though the uneven terrain made precision difficult. Dark brown hair covered the entire body, matted and thick. It moved with purpose, not the shambling gait of a bear on its hind legs. Bears could walk upright for short distances, but their movement was clumsy, unstable. This was different. Each step looked natural, balanced, as if walking on 2 legs was its primary mode of movement. Brian kept the phone steady, trying to capture as much detail as possible. The creature moved through dappled sunlight, filtering through the pine canopy. In the brighter patches, the hair appeared lighter, almost reddish-brown. In the shadows, it looked nearly black. The head sat directly on the shoulders with almost no visible neck. When the creature turned slightly, Brian could see the profile. The forehead sloped back sharply from the pronounced brow. The jaw jutted forward. It was not a bear. It was not a person. Brian's recording shows 47 seconds of this initial sighting. The creature moved from left to right across the clearing, never looking in his direction. Its arms swung naturally at its sides, longer than human arms, reaching past where the knees would be. The legs were thick and powerful, each step covering nearly 4 feet of ground. When it reached the far tree line, it paused. The head turned slightly, profile visible for just 3 seconds. The face showed a pronounced brow ridge and a flat nose. Then it disappeared into the dense understory. Every instinct told Brian to return to his vehicle. The parking area was less than 2 miles back. He could be there in 30 minutes at a quick pace. Instead, he moved forward. He would later tell investigators that something compelled him to follow, a curiosity that overrode his fear. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Whatever he had just seen, it was real, and it was in front of him. He stayed on the trail for another 100 feet, then stepped off into the palmetto. The creature had left disturbed vegetation, bent fronds showing the direction of travel. The path was unmistakable. Something large had pushed through here, and recently. Brian kept his phone raised, recording continuously now. The footage shows his hands shaking, the image bouncing with each step. The palmetto grew thicker off-trail, the stiff fronds reaching waist-high. They scraped against his pants and grabbed at his boots. Progress was slow. He had to push through with his free hand while keeping the camera up with his right. Sweat began to form on his forehead, despite the moderate temperature. The exertion combined with adrenaline made his breathing heavier. He tracked the disturbances for roughly 300 feet, moving deeper into an area where the pines grew denser and the understory thickened with saw palmetto and gallberry. The canopy blocked much of the afternoon sun. Shadows stretched across the forest floor. The temperature felt cooler here, away from direct sunlight. His video timestamp showed 2:17 p.m. when he stopped again. Something had changed in the forest. The usual sounds, the distant birds and rustling of small animals, had ceased completely. Brian panned his camera slowly from left to right. The recording captured his breathing, faster now, and the crunch of dry pine needles under his boots. He stood completely still, listening. Nothing. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Movement flickered in his peripheral vision. He spun left, camera following. The creature stood 80 feet away, partially obscured by a dead pine. But it was facing him now. The footage shows a clear frontal view for nearly 8 seconds. The body was broader than any human, the chest barrel-shaped and covered in dark hair that appeared lighter around the face. The arms hung at its sides, hands visible, each finger clearly defined. The hands looked almost human in structure, but larger, much larger. Each hand appeared to be at least 12 inches long. The face stared directly at the camera. The eyes were dark, sunken beneath that heavy brow ridge. Brian froze. The creature did not move. It simply watched him, standing perfectly still in a way that felt deliberate, patient. Then it stepped out from behind the tree. The full height became apparent. Brian's angle, shooting slightly upward, confirmed this thing stood well over 7 feet tall. The legs were thick, powerful, built for strength rather than speed. Or so Brian thought. It took 2 steps forward, closing the distance to about 70 feet. Each step was measured, controlled. Brian's camera lowered slightly, his arm wavering. The footage becomes less steady. His hands were shaking more now. The creature took another step. Brian backed up. His boot caught on something, a root or vine hidden under the pine needles, and the camera jerked as he caught himself. He stumbled but did not fall. When he raised the phone again, the creature had moved. It was now 50 feet away. It had covered 20 feet in the second or two when Brian's camera was down. The speed was wrong. Something that large should not be able to move that quickly, that quietly. The recording shows Brian turning and walking quickly back the way he came. He kept the camera pointed behind him, over his shoulder. The creature followed. It matched his pace, maintaining the 50-foot distance. The spacing felt intentional, not close enough to be an immediate threat, but close enough to maintain pressure. Brian increased his speed. The creature did the same. Its movements remained smooth, efficient. The footage captured nearly 2 minutes of this pursuit. The creature never closed the gap further, but it never fell behind. It walked with the same steady, powerful stride. Its head remained fixed on Brian, tracking his movement through the forest. The eyes never left him. Brian glanced forward to navigate, then back to check the creature's position. Each time he looked back, it was still there, still maintaining that exact distance. The precision felt wrong. Animals did not behave this way. They either attacked or they fled. This was something else entirely. Brian reached the area where he first left the trail. He scrambled up onto the path, nearly dropping his phone. The footage shows dirt and vegetation, then the trail ahead as he turned to run. He looked back one more time. The creature stood at the edge of the trail, 40 feet away now. It had stopped moving. Brian ran. The recording went dark as he shoved the phone in his pocket, but the audio continued. His breathing came in gasps, his footsteps pounding on the hard-packed sand trail. The audio captured something else. A sound that started low, almost a rumble, then rose in pitch. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, unlike anything in the Florida wilderness. Not a bear, not a panther, not any known animal. The vocalization seemed to come from multiple directions, echoing through the pines. Brian's running footsteps stuttered, slowed. The camera came back out of his pocket. The footage shows the trail ahead, empty. Brian turned in a full circle, nothing visible in any direction. He moved forward again, no longer running but walking fast. His breathing had settled slightly. The trail curved ahead, returning toward the prairie. Brian checked behind him every few seconds. The forest remained empty, but something felt wrong. He later described it as a pressure, a sense of being watched from all sides. The footage shows him scanning the tree line continuously. At 2:31 p.m., roughly 14 minutes after the initial sighting, he was approximately half a mile from his vehicle. A crack echoed through the forest. The sound was sharp, loud like a gunshot. Brian spun toward the sound. His camera captured a pine branch, easily 6 inches in diameter, falling to the trail 30 feet ahead. It hit the ground with a heavy thud that sent up dust. The branch had broken cleanly, snapped near the trunk. There was no wind. The air was still. Pine branches did not simply break on their own. Brian approached slowly, his footsteps hesitant. The footage shows him looking up into the canopy. The tree where the branch had broken stood at least 40 feet tall. Nothing visible in the upper branches. No movement. He stepped around the branch and continued. His pace had slowed considerably now. He checked the forest on both sides constantly. 20 feet later, another crack. This time from the right side of the trail. Another branch, this one even larger, perhaps 8 inches across. It crashed through the understory, breaking smaller branches on its way down. It landed 15 feet from where Brian stood. The impact shook the ground slightly. Brian could feel it through his boots. He stopped walking completely. His breathing was audible on the recording now, coming in short, quick bursts. He raised his camera, filming the forest on both sides. The footage shows dense vegetation, shadows between the trees. The palmetto was too thick to see more than 20 feet in most directions. He called out, asking if anyone was there. His voice carried through the quiet forest, sounding small and uncertain. No response came, not a sound. He waited for perhaps 15 seconds, the camera still rolling. Nothing. He started moving again, faster now. His walk was almost a jog. The trail straightened ahead, offering a clear view for perhaps 100 feet. Brian focused on that distant section, on reaching open ground. If he could get back to the prairie, to the trailhead, he would be safe. The parking area felt impossibly far away now, though it was less than half a mile. The third branch came from directly overhead. The crack was louder, sharper. It sounded closer. Brian looked up just as it fell. The footage captured his dive to the side, the camera swinging wildly. Sky, trees, ground, all blurred together. He hit the ground hard, landing on his left side. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. The phone flew from his hand, tumbling through the air. It landed in the palmetto, camera facing the trail. The branch, nearly 8 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh, slammed into the trail where he had been standing. The impact sent up a cloud of dust and pine needles. If Brian had not moved, if he had been even a second slower, the branch would have struck him directly. The phone landed in the palmetto, camera facing the trail. The angle showed Brian on his hands and knees, scrambling to his feet. He looked up into the canopy, then all around. His mouth moved, words inaudible on the recording. He stepped toward where the phone lay, reaching down. Before he could grab it, a rock struck the ground 3 feet from the phone. The rock hit with force, embedding itself slightly in the soft sand. Then another, landing between Brian and the device. The rocks were substantial, each the size of a softball. They came from the right side of the trail. Brian jerked back, stumbling. A third rock hit closer to the phone, then a fourth. They formed a pattern, a line across the trail. Brian changed direction, moving left, circling to reach his phone from a different angle. More rocks pelted the trail, 5 more in rapid succession. They fell with precision, each one landing exactly where Brian was trying to move. They formed a line, as if thrown deliberately to block his path. The spacing was too exact to be random. Brian stopped. He stared in the direction the rocks were coming from. The footage, from its position in the undergrowth, captured his profile. His body language showed tension, hands raised slightly in front of him. Defensive. He took a step back, then another. His head turned slowly, scanning the tree line, looking for the source. Something massive moved through the palmetto on the right side of the trail. The vegetation shook violently, fronds bending and breaking. Something large was pushing through, and it was not being careful about stealth anymore. The sound grew louder, closer. Brian turned to run. The footage captured his legs as he passed the phone, sprinting down the trail. His boots kicked up sand with each stride. The sounds of breaking vegetation grew louder. Whatever was in the forest was moving fast, parallel to the trail. The palmetto rattled and shook along a 30-foot section. Brian's footsteps faded slightly as he got further from the phone. His breathing was ragged, panicked. The sound of breaking branches continued, getting closer to the camera's position. The entire understory seemed to be moving. Then it appeared. The creature stepped out of the palmetto 20 feet from where the phone lay. The angle captured it from roughly waist height. The massive legs, trunk-like and covered in dark hair. Each leg was thicker than any human thigh, the muscles visible even through the hair as it moved. The arms hanging forward slightly, the hands flexed, fingers spreading and closing. It turned its head, looking down the trail in the direction Brian had gone. The face was fully visible for nearly 4 seconds, heavy brow ridge casting shadows over the eyes, deep-set eyes that reflected light slightly, giving them an almost luminous quality. Flat nose with large nostrils that flared as it breathed. The mouth was closed, the jaw prominent and strong. Hair covered most of the face, but thinned around the eyes and mouth, revealing dark skin underneath. The expression was not aggressive, but focused, intelligent. The eyes showed awareness, calculation. The creature took 3 steps onto the trail, each footfall visible in the frame. The feet were enormous, easily 18 inches long, wider than a human foot. The toes splayed out with each step, gripping the sand. 5 toes were clearly visible on the left foot as it lifted. The foot flexed naturally, the arch visible. These were not bear paws, not costume pieces. The movement was too natural, too complex. The creature paused in the middle of the trail, turned its head back toward the camera for just a moment. The eyes seemed to look directly at the lens. Then it looked down the trail again, toward where Brian had disappeared. It dropped into a forward stance, weight shifting onto the balls of its feet. The knees bent slightly. The arms came up, hands positioned forward. Then it ran. The speed was shocking. The creature covered ground faster than seemed possible for something so large. Its gait was not quite human, the stride too long, each step covering nearly 6 feet. The arm swing was too pronounced, the arms pumping with tremendous force. But it was clearly bipedal running, not the quadrupedal gallop of a bear. The power in each stride was visible in how its feet struck the ground, sending up small clouds of sand. Within 3 seconds, it had disappeared around the curve in the trail. The sound of its footfalls continued for several seconds more, heavy thuds that faded into the distance. The forest fell silent again. The phone continued recording from its position in the palmetto, showing only the empty trail and the rocks scattered across the sand. Small clouds of dust still hung in the air where the creature had run. 43 seconds later, a scream cut through the forest. It was human, Brian's voice coming from perhaps 200 feet away. The scream was raw, primal, filled with terror and pain. It lasted 2 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Impact sounds followed, something heavy hitting the ground. A grunt, distinctly human. More sounds of struggle, breaking vegetation, thrashing, then silence again. Complete silence. The phone recorded nothing but that silence for nearly 30 seconds. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. The forest held its breath. Movement appeared at the edge of the frame. Brian came into view, crawling on the trail. He was bleeding from his forehead, blood running down the left side of his face. The cut was deep, possibly from hitting the ground or a rock. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, the fabric hanging loose. Scratches covered his exposed shoulder, some deep enough to bleed. He crawled toward the phone, each movement showing pain. His left arm dragged slightly, not moving correctly. The shoulder hung at an odd angle, dislocated. He reached the phone, grabbed it with his right hand. His fingers were shaking, barely able to grip. The camera swung up, showing his face for just a moment. The blood, the wide eyes, the dirt caked on his right cheek. His mouth was open, breathing hard. Then the footage went dark as he pulled the phone close to his chest, curling around it protectively. The audio continued. Brian's breathing was ragged, gasping. Each breath sounded painful, catching in his throat. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Not running now. Walking. Slow. Each footfall was distinct, spaced several feet apart. They stopped close, very close, perhaps 3 feet from where Brian lay. A new sound emerged, a breathing that was not Brian's. Deeper, slower, resonating. It came from directly above the microphone. Something was standing over him. The breathing was steady, controlled. Whatever stood there was not winded from the chase. Brian's breathing stopped as if he was holding his breath, trying to be completely still. The other breathing continued, a sniffing sound, like an animal investigating something. Long inhalations, processing scent. This continued for nearly 20 seconds. Each second must have felt like an eternity for Brian, lying there wounded with something massive standing over him. A low sound, almost a grunt, came from whatever was standing above Brian. The tone was neither aggressive nor curious. It sounded almost satisfied, confirmatory. Then the heavy footsteps again, moving away. Each step clearly audible. They grew fainter but did not hurry. The creature was walking, not running. The footsteps stopped somewhere in the distance, still close enough to hear, perhaps 40 feet away. Brian's breathing resumed, sharp and quick, hyperventilating. He did not move. The audio captured him lying there for another minute, maybe longer. His breathing slowly steadied, though it remained fast. Finally, movement, fabric rustling, the sound of him sitting up, a groan of pain, his voice barely a whisper, words unclear. Could have been prayer, could have been nothing. The camera came back up, pointing ahead. The footage showed the trail, empty now. Brian panned right, then left. Nothing visible. He struggled to his feet, the camera shaking violently. Getting up took nearly 10 seconds. Each movement was agony. His left ankle gave out the first time he tried to stand, and he dropped back to one knee with a gasp. On the second attempt, he made it upright, but could not put full weight on the left leg. He started moving, limping badly. His left leg was not working properly. The ankle was either badly sprained or broken. Each step came with a grunt of pain. The camera pointed down at the trail, showing his boots and the sand passing beneath. Blood dripped from his forehead, leaving dark spots on the sand. He moved perhaps 30 feet, each step slower than the last. Then he stopped. He raised the camera again. The creature stood in the trail ahead. The distance was hard to judge from the footage, but investigators later estimated roughly 60 feet based on known trail features visible in the frame. It faced Brian directly, standing in the center of the trail. The lighting was better here, the canopy thinner. Late afternoon sun filtered through, illuminating the creature clearly. The footage captured details that had been obscured in shadows before. The massive shoulders, the broad chest rising and falling with breath. The arms, so much longer than human proportions, hanging relaxed at its sides. The face, mostly hair-covered, but the eyes visible. Dark eyes, watching. Not black like a bear's eyes, but dark brown, almost human in color. The creature's chest moved with its breathing, slow and steady. It shifted its weight from one foot to the other, a subtle movement, but distinctly visible. It did not advance. It simply stood there, blocking the trail, watching Brian with what could only be described as curiosity. Brian took a step backward. His injured leg nearly buckled, but he caught himself. The creature did not react. Its head remained level, eyes fixed on Brian. Another step back. Brian's breathing was loud on the audio, each breath catching with pain. Still no movement from the creature. It waited. Brian turned and began moving away, faster now despite the limp. His body was running on pure adrenaline, overriding the pain signals. He kept the camera pointed behind him. The creature remained where it stood, watching him retreat. Its posture was relaxed, non-threatening. It made no move to follow. Brian covered roughly 40 feet, each step visible in the shaky footage. He fell once, going down hard on his right knee. The camera caught the impact, then sky as he nearly dropped the phone. He recovered, got back up, kept moving. When he glanced back once more, the creature was gone. The trail stood empty. No movement in the vegetation, no sound. It had simply disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. The remainder of the footage showed Brian's painful journey back to the trailhead. He fell twice more, the camera capturing the ground, then sky, then the trail again as he recovered. He never stopped checking behind him. The forest remained quiet, no signs of pursuit. At 2:49 p.m., he reached the parking area. His vehicle was the only one there. The footage showed him fumbling with his keys, dropping them once before getting the door open. The recording ended as he collapsed into the driver's seat. Brian drove directly to Advent Health Waterman in Tavares, 35 miles from the forest. Medical records show he arrived at 3:27 p.m. with lacerations to his scalp requiring 12 stitches, a dislocated left shoulder, severe bruising across his back and left side, and a sprained left ankle. The attending physician documented Brian's account of being attacked by an unknown animal while hiking. Brian turned over his phone to Tavares Police Department that evening. The footage, totaling 31 minutes and 47 seconds, underwent analysis by 3 separate wildlife experts. All confirmed the subject in the video was not a bear, not a person in a costume, and not any known animal in Florida. The proportions, movement patterns, and physical characteristics did not match any documented species. Frame-by-frame analysis of the clearest shots showed details impossible to fabricate with 2025 consumer technology, including individual hair movement, muscle definition beneath the hair, and micro-expressions in the facial features. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission investigated the location 3 days after the incident. Officers found disturbed vegetation consistent with Brian's account, broken branches at the reported locations, and impressions in soft ground near the trail. One clear track measured 17 inches long and 9 inches across at the widest point. Casting was attempted, but the ground conditions produced only a partial mold. The investigation report concluded that Brian had encountered something in Ocala National Forest, but could not determine what species. Brian Phillips recovered from his physical injuries within 8 weeks. He has refused all media requests and will not disclose the exact trail location beyond the general area of Farlow's Prairie. In his single statement to investigators, he described the moment the creature stood over him as the most terrifying experience of his life, not because of what it did, but because of what it chose not to do. The footage remains the clearest, most detailed Bigfoot evidence ever captured in Florida, and the only documented case of physical contact with injuries requiring medical treatment. On October 13, 2023, Emma Rodriguez had been in the Olympic National Forest for only 3 hours when she first heard the sound that would haunt her nightmares forever. The low, resonant call seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet and echoing from the trees themselves. She froze on the trail, her heart pounding as the sound repeated, too deep and too complex to be produced by any known animal, yet carrying an unmistakable intelligence that suggested communication rather than simple vocalization. The forest around her had fallen completely silent, as if every living creature was holding its breath in terror of what had just announced its presence. Emma's camera equipment began malfunctioning the moment she tried to record the strange vocalizations, her devices shutting down at seemingly random intervals, despite having functioned perfectly just minutes before. Her GPS readings showed impossible coordinates that placed her in locations that didn't exist on any map, while her compass spun wildly as if something was actively interfering with her technology. The silence that followed the creature's call was so complete, it seemed to press against her eardrums like a living thing, broken only by the sound of her own panicked breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath her trembling feet. But beneath that silence, Emma began to detect something else, the almost imperceptible sound of something massive moving through the undergrowth with impossible stealth. When Emma finally worked up the courage to continue down the trail, she discovered massive footprints pressed deep into the soft earth, prints that measured nearly 18 inches in length and showed clear evidence of opposable thumbs. The tracks formed a deliberate pattern around the area where she'd been standing, as if something had been circling her position while she remained frozen in terror. Most disturbing was the realization that whatever had made these prints had approached to within mere feet of where she stood, close enough to touch her. Yet she had never seen or heard its approach through the dense undergrowth. The depth of the impression suggested something that weighed over 600 pounds, moving with a grace that defied its massive size. Emma's attempts to leave the area were immediately frustrated by obstacles that seemed too coordinated to be coincidental. Fallen trees blocked the trail she'd used to enter the forest, positioned in ways that suggested deliberate placement rather than natural occurrence. Her satellite phone produced only static and interference that seemed to intensify whenever she tried to call for help, as if something was actively jamming her communications to prevent her from sharing her discoveries with the outside world. The isolation that had seemed appealing when she'd planned this expedition now felt like a trap, with Emma beginning to realize that she was no longer the observer in this situation, but rather the observed. Every step she took seemed to be anticipated, every route she chose blocked by obstacles that appeared too convenient to be natural. The first direct sighting came as Emma struggled to find an alternate route through the dense forest, her panic growing with each blocked path and dead end. Through the trees ahead, she caught a glimpse of something enormous moving between the massive trunks with impossible stealth, a figure that stood upright like a human but possessed proportions that suggested a creature of incredible size and strength. The being seemed to be studying her from a distance, its movements coordinated and purposeful as it paralleled her desperate attempts to escape. When Emma tried to focus her camera on the creature, the device immediately shut down, leaving her with only the terrifying memory of eyes that reflected the filtered sunlight with unmistakable intelligence, and what appeared to be curiosity about her presence in its domain. Emma's terror escalated when she realized that the creature was not alone. Sounds of movement from multiple directions indicated that she was surrounded by several large beings that were coordinating their activities with a precision that suggested advanced communication abilities. The forest itself seemed to be working against her escape, with branches that caught at her clothing in ways that seemed too deliberate to be accidental, and roots that appeared to shift position to trip her at crucial moments. Her attempts to document what was happening were frustrated by equipment failures that occurred at the most crucial moments, as if whatever was watching her understood the importance of preventing her from gathering evidence of their existence. The creatures seemed to possess an understanding of human technology that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. Emma's frantic escape became a blur of terror as the forest closed in around her. The deeper she ran, the more the landscape twisted. Paths vanished, landmarks shifted, and the air grew thick with the scent of earth and something musky. Every time she paused, she could hear the creatures moving just out of sight, their footfalls muffled, guttural calls echoing like a language meant for the trees. At one point, Emma tumbled down a slope into a shallow creek. The water was icy, shocking her back to her senses. She scrambled up, only to see a massive shadow pass silently along the ridge above. The creature paused, its silhouette framed by moonlight, and Emma felt its gaze settle on her like a physical weight. She pressed herself against the bank, barely daring to breathe, as the being let out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her bones. The chase resumed, but now the creatures were driving her, not just following, but steering her with uncanny precision. Whenever she tried to double back or hide, a branch would snap or a stone would be thrown, forcing her to change direction. She caught glimpses of more than one figure moving in parallel, their eyes glinting in the darkness, their movements impossibly fast and coordinated. Emma realized with dread that she was being herded toward a destination she could neither see nor understand. Suddenly, the forest opened into a wide, unnatural clearing. The ground was covered in spirals of stones and bones, and the trees around the perimeter were marked with deep gouges and strange symbols. The air was thick with anticipation, and Emma felt as if she had stepped into the center of some ancient ritual. The largest creature emerged from the shadows, standing at the edge of the clearing, its breath steaming in the cold night air. It raised its arms and let out a series of calls, each one answered by the others in a chorus that made the ground tremble. Emma stood frozen, her mind racing. Was this a warning? A test? The creatures circled the clearing, their eyes never leaving her, their movements deliberate and measured. For a moment, time seemed to stretch and warp, the world narrowing to the circle of stones and the silent, watching eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the ritual ended. The creatures melted back into the forest, leaving Emma alone and trembling in the center of the clearing. She didn't wait to see if they would return. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, Emma fled into the darkness. The memory of the ritual burned into her mind. Even as she ran, she knew the forest was still watching, and that whatever had happened in that clearing was only a glimpse of a mystery that would never let her go. The psychological pressure of constant surveillance began to manifest in ways that Emma struggled to understand or control. She found herself anticipating the movements of her unseen watchers, adjusting her path to avoid areas where she sensed their presence, while simultaneously being herded along routes that led deeper into their territory. The creatures seemed to be learning from their observations of her behavior, adapting their tactics based on her responses, and becoming more sophisticated in their approach with each passing hour. Emma began to feel like a laboratory animal being studied by researchers whose intelligence far exceeded her own, trapped in an experiment whose purpose she couldn't begin to understand. The realization that she was being manipulated by something that could think and plan was more terrifying than simple predation. The most direct encounter came when Emma stumbled into a small clearing and found herself face to face with the massive creature that had been stalking her through the forest. The being stood over 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to shimmer with an almost metallic quality in the filtered sunlight, with eyes that held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. It studied her with the same intensity that she had been trying to use to study the forest, tilting its massive head as if trying to understand what kind of creature she was and what her intentions might be. The moment of eye contact lasted only seconds, but it left Emma with the chilling realization that she was being evaluated according to criteria she couldn't comprehend. The creature's expression seemed almost curious, as if it was encountering something as unusual to it as it was to her. Emma's attempt to slowly back away from the creature was met with a low vocalization that seemed to carry meaning, as if the being was trying to communicate something important or warn her about something she couldn't see. The sound was complex, with tonal variations that suggested it was part of a sophisticated language system, and Emma had the disturbing realization that the creature was actually trying to talk to her. When she continued to retreat, the creature's vocalizations became more insistent, and she could hear answering calls from the forest around her as other beings responded to what sounded like tactical coordination. The realization that she was surrounded by multiple intelligent creatures that were discussing her fate in a language she couldn't understand filled Emma with a terror that transcended anything she had ever experienced. The decision to run came when Emma heard the creatures beginning to move closer, their massive forms crashing through the underbrush with increasing boldness as they closed the distance between themselves and their subject. She turned and sprinted toward what she hoped was the direction of the main trail, her flight through the dark forest becoming a nightmare of stumbling over unseen obstacles and constantly looking over her shoulder for signs of pursuit. The creature's response was immediate and coordinated, with sounds of movement that indicated they were not willing to let their subject escape without a significant effort to recapture her. Their pursuit began with what sounded almost like disappointment, as if they had hoped for a different outcome from their attempted communication. The chase through the forest revealed the true extent of the creature's physical capabilities as they moved through the dense woodland with a speed and agility that seemed impossible for beings of their size. Emma could hear them crashing through the trees behind her, their pursuit coordinated in ways that suggested they were working together to cut off her escape routes and funnel her toward a destination of their choosing. The sounds of their movement indicated that they were not simply chasing her, but were actively herding her, using their superior knowledge of the terrain to guide her flight along paths that would eventually lead her back into their control. Their footsteps thundered through the forest with a rhythm that suggested they were matching each other's pace, working as a coordinated unit rather than individual predators. During her desperate flight, Emma began to notice that the very forest seemed to be conspiring with her pursuers, creating obstacles that slowed her progress while providing clear pathways for the creatures that hunted her through the darkness. Branches caught at her clothing with deliberate precision. Roots shifted to trip her at crucial moments, and the terrain itself seemed to funnel her toward areas where her pursuers could more easily corner her. Most disturbing was the growing realization that the sounds of pursuit were becoming more organized and strategic, with different voices calling to each other in what sounded like tactical coordination. The creatures were communicating constantly during the chase, sharing information about her location and coordinating their movements with military precision. As Emma stumbled through the undergrowth, her panic-stricken mind began to process details that her terror had initially obscured, fragments of understanding that painted an even more disturbing picture of her situation. The creatures pursuing her seemed to be using tools. She could hear the distinctive sounds of implements striking wood and stone, suggesting they possessed technology that no wild animal should have been able to create or use. Their vocalizations carried nuances that indicated not just communication, but complex language, with tonal variations that suggested they were discussing strategy and coordinating their efforts with a sophistication that rivaled human military operations. The realization that she was being hunted by something that could think, plan, and use tools was more terrifying than any simple animal attack. The forest around Emma began to take on an increasingly surreal quality as her flight continued, with shadows that moved independently of any visible source and sounds that seemed to come from directions that defied the laws of physics. She found herself running through areas that her rational mind insisted couldn't exist. clearings that were perfectly circular despite being surrounded by ancient trees, streams that flowed uphill, and rock formations that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. The pursuit behind her continued relentlessly, accompanied by phenomena that suggested the very fabric of reality was being manipulated by forces beyond her comprehension. The creatures seemed to possess abilities that went beyond simple physical prowess, as if they could influence the environment itself to aid in their hunt. Emma's terror reached new heights when she realized that her pursuers seemed to be enjoying the chase, their calls carrying what could only be described as amusement, as if her panic was providing them with entertainment rather than simply serving a practical purpose. The creatures appeared to be toying with her, allowing her to think she was escaping only to cut off her route and force her to change direction. Their superior knowledge of the terrain gave them an overwhelming advantage, and Emma began to understand that her flight was nothing more than another part of their experiment, a test of her responses under extreme stress rather than a genuine opportunity for freedom. The psychological warfare was as deliberate as their physical pursuit, designed to break down her resistance and force her into complete submission. At one point during the chase, Emma managed to climb a massive fallen tree that had created a natural bridge across a deep ravine, hoping to put some distance between herself and her pursuers. But as she reached the middle of the makeshift bridge, she heard the unmistakable sound of the creatures climbing up behind her with impossible agility. Their massive hands gripped the bark with ease, their powerful limbs propelling them up the trunk with a speed that defied their enormous size. Emma could hear their breathing growing closer, deep and rhythmic, like the sound of massive bellows. And she realized with growing horror that they were actually gaining on her, despite her head start. The creature's pursuit took on an almost playful quality, as they began to demonstrate abilities that seemed designed to showcase their superiority over their human prey. Emma watched in terror as one of the beings leaped from tree to tree with impossible grace, covering distances that should have been fatal for any creature of its size. Another seemed to be moving through the forest canopy above her, keeping pace with her desperate flight while remaining almost completely invisible among the dense foliage. The coordination between the creatures was so precise that Emma began to suspect they were communicating through methods she couldn't detect, perhaps using infrasonic frequencies or other signals that were beyond human perception. As Emma's energy waned, she stumbled into a clearing she didn't recognize, one that seemed impossibly ancient, the ground covered in spirals of stones and bones. The air was thick with the scent of moss and something musky, and the trees pressed in so tightly that the sky was only a memory. The creatures paused at the edge, watching her with a patience that felt almost ritualistic. For a moment, Emma felt as if she were the centerpiece of a ceremony, the subject of a gathering that had been waiting for her arrival for centuries. The largest of the beings stepped forward, raising its arms and letting out a guttural call that echoed through the trees, answered by the others in a chorus that made the ground vibrate beneath her feet. Suddenly, the spell was broken. The creatures turned and melted back into the forest, leaving Emma alone in the clearing. She didn't know if she had passed some kind of test or if they had simply lost interest, but she seized the opportunity to run. Branches whipped at her face, and roots threatened to trip her with every step, but she pushed on, driven by a primal fear that drowned out all rational thought. Behind her, she could still hear the creatures moving, their calls growing fainter as she put distance between them. But even as she escaped, Emma knew the forest was still watching, and that whatever had happened in that clearing was only the beginning of a mystery that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The breakthrough that would save Emma's life came when she stumbled into an area where her cell phone unexpectedly picked up a weak signal, allowing her to place a frantic call to emergency services while still running from her pursuers. The 911 recording captured her panicked description of being chased by creatures that defied rational explanation, beings that moved through the forest with intelligence and coordination that suggested advanced cognitive abilities. Her call was interrupted by sounds that the emergency operator later described as unlike anything in their experience. Vocalizations that seemed to come from multiple sources and carried an unmistakable sense of intelligence and purpose. The creatures seemed to realize what she was doing and began calling to each other with increased urgency, as if debating whether to stop her communication or allow it to continue. Emma's call ended abruptly when her phone lost signal, but not before emergency responders had obtained her GPS coordinates and a recording that would become the subject of intense analysis and debate. The creatures pursuing her seemed to realize that outside help was coming, and their vocalizations took on a different quality, less playful and more urgent, as if they were debating whether to continue their pursuit or retreat deeper into the forest. Emma could hear them calling to each other in what sounded like rapid consultation, their massive forms still crashing through the trees behind her, but with less coordination than before. The change in their behavior suggested that they understood the implications of human authorities becoming involved in their activities. The sound of approaching helicopters seemed to trigger a fundamental change in the creatures' behavior, their pursuit becoming less aggressive as they apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Emma could still hear them moving through the forest around her, but they were no longer actively hurting her or trying to cut off her escape routes. Instead, they seemed to be withdrawing deeper into the wilderness, their vocalizations fading as they put distance between themselves and the approaching rescue operation. Emma's relief was tempered by the realization that her ordeal was far from over. She was still lost in a vast wilderness with creatures that could return at any moment if they decided the threat had passed. The creatures' withdrawal was not immediate or complete, as Emma continued to hear them moving through the forest around her for several more hours. They seemed to be maintaining surveillance of her position while staying far enough away to avoid detection by the search teams. Their vocalizations became more subdued but never stopped entirely, suggesting that they were continuing to communicate about her presence and the arrival of outside help. Emma had the disturbing realization that she was still being watched and evaluated, even as rescue teams worked to locate her position. The creature's ability to remain hidden while maintaining awareness of the situation demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that was deeply unsettling. As the search helicopters grew closer, Emma began to notice changes in the forest around her that suggested the creatures were actively working to conceal evidence of their presence. Footprints that had been clearly visible just hours before seemed to be disappearing, as if someone was deliberately obscuring the tracks. Equipment that had been scattered during her flight was being moved or hidden, and the paths through the forest that had seemed so clear during the chase were becoming increasingly difficult to follow. The creatures appeared to be conducting a systematic cleanup operation, removing any evidence that might confirm Emma's incredible story about what had happened in the wilderness. The search and rescue operation that followed Emma's emergency call revealed evidence that supported her incredible claims while raising new questions about what had actually occurred in those remote mountains. Rangers found massive footprints throughout the area where Emma had been chased, tracks that formed complex patterns suggesting coordinated movement by multiple large beings. Her camera equipment was discovered scattered throughout the forest, positioned in ways that suggested deliberate placement rather than random dropping, with memory cards that contained hours of footage showing glimpses of enormous figures moving through the trees with obvious intelligence and purpose. The equipment had been handled with care, as if the creatures understood its value and had deliberately preserved it for discovery. The footage recovered from Emma's cameras provided the most compelling evidence ever captured of intelligent non-human life in North American forests, showing clear images of bipedal creatures that stood over 8 feet tall and moved with coordination that indicated advanced cognitive abilities. The beings appeared to be deliberately positioning themselves to be recorded, as if they wanted their existence to be documented, but only under circumstances of their own choosing. Most remarkably, some sequences showed the creatures using what appeared to be primitive tools and communicating with each other through complex vocalizations that suggested a sophisticated language system. The footage also captured moments where the creatures seemed to be studying Emma's equipment with obvious scientific interest, manipulating her devices with a dexterity that suggested hands capable of fine motor control. Analysis of the recovered footage revealed details that investigators found deeply unsettling, particularly the way the creatures seemed to be conducting their own documentation of Emma's behavior and responses. Several sequences showed the beings using what appeared to be primitive recording devices of their own, crude but functional tools that suggested they were gathering their own evidence of the encounter for purposes that remained completely mysterious. The creatures' behavior indicated not just intelligence, but also scientific curiosity, as if they were conducting their own research project with Emma as the unwilling subject. Most disturbing was the discovery that some of the footage had been edited or altered in ways that suggested the creatures possessed technical knowledge that exceeded what should have been possible for beings living in the wilderness. Emma was found 12 hours after her emergency call, discovered by search teams following the trail of broken vegetation and scattered equipment that marked her desperate flight through the forest. She was dehydrated and exhausted, but physically unharmed, though her mental state suggested she had experienced trauma that went far beyond simple fear of wild animals. Her account of being chased by multiple intelligent creatures was initially met with skepticism, but the physical evidence and recorded footage forced investigators to take her claims seriously. Most puzzling was her insistence that the creatures had deliberately allowed her to escape once they realized that outside help was coming, suggesting that their intelligence extended to understanding the broader implications of their actions. The evidence left behind after Emma's escape, strange tool marks, massive coordinated footprints, and her haunting footage, forced even the most skeptical rangers to admit she had encountered something far beyond a wild animal. The area was quietly restricted, and rumors spread of a hidden society in the forest. But Emma's story remained the only first-hand account. Her experience stands as a chilling warning. Some mysteries in the wild are not meant to be solved, and the silence of the forest may be watching, waiting for the next intruder. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.